In a county in West Virginia, a piece of land changed hands, and almost nobody who lived nearby found out until the surveying started. It was not a large sale, ridge ground mostly, the kind of acreage that has been in the same 3 or 4 families since before the Civil War, the kind that gets passed down in wills written in longhand. The kind nobody ever thought of as valuable the way a downtown block is valuable. The buyer was not a person. It was a limited liability company. The address on the deed led to a registered agent office in another state, a building that has never seen the land it now owns, staffed by people who could not find that county on a map. That part is not unusual anymore. That is simply how land in these mountains changes hands now. What is unusual is what the buyers wanted it for. Because the people buying Appalachian land right now are not buying it for the coal. The coal era is finished, and everyone involved knows it. They are not buying it for the timber, although they will take the timber. And in most cases, they are not buying it to build anything you would recognize as a building. They are buying it for 2 things underneath it that Appalachia happens to have more of than almost anywhere else in America. And once those 2 things are committed, they do not come back. To understand what is being done to these mountains right now, you have to understand that it was already done once, and that somebody wrote the whole thing down. In the fall of 1978, a group of researchers and community organizers formed something called the Appalachian Land Ownership Task Force. They were not academics chasing a grant. Most of them were from the counties they were about to study. They wanted an answer to a question that people in the coal fields had been asking out loud for 3 generations without ever being able to prove it. The question was simple: who actually owns this place? They went into courthouses across 80 counties in 6 states: Alabama, Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. They pulled deed books by hand. It took them years. When they published in 1981, the number they came back with was this: absentee owners, corporations, and government agencies, together with 1% of the local population, controlled 53% of the total land surface across those 80 counties. More than half of Appalachia, held by people who did not live there. In many of those counties, absentee mining companies alone owned more than half the land outright. In some, they held as much as 70% of the mineral rights. The part underneath, the part that actually pays. Now, here is the piece that matters most, and it is the piece that almost never gets told. That ownership structure is the reason for the poverty. Not the terrain, not the isolation, not any of the things outsiders have been saying about these mountains for 150 years. When a corporation in another state owns half your county, that corporation's land gets assessed at almost nothing. So your county collects almost nothing. So there is no money for the school, or the road, or the hospital, or the water line. The wealth comes out of the ground, gets loaded onto a train, and leaves. What stays behind is the hole and the tax bill. Then people looked at the result, at the schools that were falling down, and the roads that never got paved, and they decided it must be something about the people who lived there. They wrote books about it, they put it on television, they called it a culture of poverty. It was never a culture of poverty, it was an ownership structure. And the reason I'm telling you about a study published in 1981 is that the exact same structure is being rebuilt right now in the same counties for a different commodity. There are 4 kinds of buyer moving on Appalachian land today. Most people in these counties have only ever heard of one of them. The first is timber money, and it has changed in a way almost nobody has noticed. Timberland investment funds have owned large blocks of Appalachian forest for decades. That part is not new. What is new is how they make their money from it. A growing share of the income from private timberland funds no longer comes from cutting anything down at all. It comes from carbon credits, from recreational leases, and from the sale of conservation easements. Sit with that for a second, because it is genuinely strange. There are now investors who profit from your mountain specifically by not logging it. They sell the uncut trees, on paper, to a corporation somewhere else that needs to offset its emissions. The forest stays standing, the money still leaves. The second buyer is foreign capital. The United States Department of Agriculture is required by law to track this, and it reports to Congress every year. The most recent report went to Congress in January of this year. As of the end of 2024, foreign investors held an interest in 46 million acres of American agricultural land. That is about 3.5% of all privately held farm and forest ground in the country, and it grew by more than 1.33 million acres in a single year. Roughly 10.5 million of those acres are tied to wind energy leases. And the government's own accounting puts at least 277,000 acres in the hands of entities linked to nations it classifies as adversaries. Now, I want to be straight with you about that number because a lot of channels are not. 46 million acres sounds enormous, and it is. But most of it is Canadian and European timber and wind holdings, not the thing people picture the moment they hear the phrase. The honest concern here is not one flag on a map. The honest concern is that a growing share of American ground is owned by entities that will never set foot on it and will never have to live with what they do to it. The third buyer is the one nobody in these counties saw coming: data centers. Right now, there are roughly 92 gigawatts of data center capacity in the pipeline across the United States. By the end of 2024, the industry was adding something like 7 gigawatts every single month. To put that in terms that actually mean something, that is the electrical demand of entire states being built on a schedule measured in weeks. For 20 years, most of that construction went to one place: Northern Virginia, a stretch of Loudoun County so dense with server farms that it earned a nickname: Data Center Alley. That corridor is now saturated. There is no more cheap land, no more spare power, and no more political patience. So it is moving west, into Pennsylvania, into West Virginia, into Kentucky. There are proposals on the table right now running from Tucker County, West Virginia, all the way down to the old strip mines of Wise County, Virginia, where a facility called Mineral Gap already came online in 2023, running partly on a solar array built across land that was mined out and abandoned. In January of last year, developers announced Kentucky's first hyperscale campus in Louisville. 400 megawatts, scheduled to begin operating around the end of this year. So why here? Why these mountains out of all the empty land in America? A data center needs 4 things, and Appalachia has every one of them. It needs cheap land, it needs enormous, uninterrupted electricity, it needs water, a great deal of water, for cooling, and it needs a local government that will say yes. The first 3 are geography. The fourth one is the part that should worry you. Because here's the detail in all of this that is almost too neat to be an accident. The high-voltage transmission lines running through these counties are already standing. They were built decades ago at enormous public expense to carry power generated from Appalachian coal out of Appalachia. To Washington, to Baltimore, to Philadelphia. Those towers never came down, and they are now going to be used to move electricity in the opposite direction, to feed buildings full of servers sitting on the same ground the coal came out of. The infrastructure of the last extraction is being reused for the next one, and the bill is already arriving. These counties sit inside a regional power grid called PJM, which covers West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and a long stretch of the Mid-Atlantic. Data center demand has helped push wholesale electricity prices inside that grid sharply upward. That cost does not stay with the data center. It lands on the monthly bill of every household on the same system. There are people in these mountains right now paying more to keep their own lights on so that a building with no windows and 11 employees can keep its servers cool. That is not a prediction. Ratepayer protests over exactly this have been happening across the region for the better part of a year. And electricity is only the first of the 2 things I mentioned at the start. The second one is water, and almost nobody is talking about it yet. Servers generate heat, enormous amounts of it, and the cheapest way to carry heat away from a building full of them is to evaporate water. A hyperscale data center can consume somewhere between 3 and 5 million gallons of water a day. Some estimates put a single large facility at up to 1 billion gallons in a year. Try to hold that in proportion. 3 to 5 million gallons a day is roughly the entire municipal water use of a town of 10,000 to 50,000 people. One building with a parking lot that is never full, drinking as much as a small city. We already know what that does to a rural county because it has already happened in one. In Newton County, Georgia, a data center that opened in 2018 uses about 500,000 gallons a day. That is 10% of everything the entire county consumes. And that county has since fielded permit requests for new facilities that would draw up to 6 million gallons a day, more than 10 times what the first one takes. Now think about where the Appalachian ridges sit in this. These mountains hold some of the most abundant fresh water in the eastern United States. Headwater streams, deep aquifers, rainfall that most of the country would envy. For 150 years, that water was treated as scenery, or as something to run a mill on, or as somewhere to put the runoff from a mine. It is about to be treated as a commodity by buyers who understand exactly what it is worth and are counting on the seller not to. And here is the part that should genuinely bother you, whatever you think about any of the rest of it. You are often not allowed to know the numbers. Water consumption figures for these facilities are frequently withheld from the public as a trade secret. In one documented case, when a local newspaper filed a public records request to find out how much water a data center was using, the company funded the city's legal effort to keep those figures from being released. A newspaper asked how much of the public water supply a private company was taking, and the answer was that the amount is proprietary. The tax side works the same way. These projects arrive with abatements attached, negotiated as a condition of coming at all. In North Carolina, the state's exemptions apply to qualifying projects investing $75 million or more, and state estimates have put the eventual cost in foregone sales tax at up to $450 million a year. The governor has proposed phasing those exemptions out. So follow the whole shape of it. The facility takes the county's water. It takes the county's power. It pays a reduced rate of tax by agreement. It employs, in most cases, a few dozen people because a building full of servers does not need many humans in it. And the number the public most wants to know is the one the public is least likely to get. I want to close by putting the two halves of this together because separately they are just news. Together they are a pattern. In 1900, the commodity was coal. Outside companies bought the land and the mineral rights cheap from families who did not know what was underneath them. They took out the value. They paid almost nothing in local tax. And when the seam ran out, they left. And counties that had generated a fortune could not afford to fix a bridge. In 2026, the commodity is electricity and water and computation. Outside companies are buying land and power access cheap, from counties that do not fully understand what they are agreeing to. They will take out the value. They will pay very little in local tax because they will negotiate abatements as a condition of coming at all. And when the technology moves on, they will leave behind a windowless building and a grid that somebody local still has to pay for. The commodity changed. The structure did not. The land is owned somewhere else, the profit is booked somewhere else, the decision is made somewhere else. And what stays behind is the hole in the ground, or the empty building, or the bill. So here is the part I actually want you to do, and it costs you nothing. If you own land in these mountains, or your parents do, or your grandparents did, go and look up who owns the parcels around yours. Most counties have their property records online now. The ones that do not will still let you walk into the courthouse and open the book. Do not look at who farms it. Look at who owns it. If the answer is a limited liability company you have never heard of, registered in Delaware or Wyoming, with an address that turns out to be somebody's office, then you already know exactly which chapter of the story your county is in. And I would genuinely like to know what you find. Put your county in the comments. I read them, and the next one of these gets built out of what you send me.